the moon was always a get well point to me and a lighthouse. It was basically made almost effortless flying in the terrain and stuff like that. And another part of that symbology with it is like, in those darkest nights, those darkest moments, you don't get to fall, you get to rise. And that's when that moon burns the brightest for me is when I need it to the most. Hey, I'm Anthony Dyer, and you're entering A World Gone Good.
Well, hello, my name's Steve, and this is the place where we shine the light on everyday people making good happen each and every day. Welcome one, welcome all to World Gone Good. Have you grabbed your copies of 1, 2, or all 3 of my books? Or just the third one? Drown Town, Murder Unmasked, and Season Slayings await your reading pleasure. Head to Barnes & Noble and or Amazon websites, order them up, and support this here author. And for doing so, for all of you who already have and all of you who are planning to, as always, I say thank you. Today, we are going to meet a veteran and author, and I'm going to warn you right now, he's one more thing. He is a quoting machine in the best way possible. That is a compliment to him. He knows history, he knows quotes, and he knows who said them. It's pretty amazing. Anthony Dyer is pretty amazing. He is a former United States Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator who took to the sky for 2+ decades. He flew high-risk missions in some of the world's most dangerous war zones. And when he came home and he retired, he found himself spiraling into a pretty dark place. He's now an author and mental health advocate using his own life experiences to help others. As he writes in his novel, Moonchild, a memoir, going to quote him now, "You can train for combat, but not what comes after." Here comes Air Force veteran and author Anthony Dyer with his good story. Well, my friends, by the time you hear this, it's going to be way past the point, but we are recording on Veterans Day, November 11th, and I am actually with a veteran, so happy Veterans Day, Anthony. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
And let me just say this so that everyone is on the ready and I'm up front. We were supposed to record yesterday. I was having technical difficulties and it was awesome and pushed it today. And I think it works out perfectly that it falls on today because to speak to a veteran about veteran issues is amazing. I want to start here with a quote that I believe you said somewhere at some point. You said, "Optimism is presence under pressure." And I want you to tell us all what you feel about that.
Yeah, I believe optimism, in those moments where, everything's going against you, especially flying, it could be the weather, the systems, the communications, just all hell breaks loose, whatever the case is. The one thing you could control is your optimism, that you're thinking and believing wholeheartedly there's a way out and you're not out of the fight yet. So that's part of the, I guess, a tactical way of looking at optimism.
Have you always been optimistic?
Yeah, for the most part, I've always, tried to find the light in situations. Downrange, I was all about humor, pranks. You name it, we probably did it to each other downrange. But yeah.
When did you enter the service and what prompted that? Did you come from a military family?
My dad was in the Air Force like 4 years, but this was way before I was born. But what had happened was my senior year in high school, I was going nowhere, and my dad sort of recognized that, and he gave me the cliche dad to son talk of like, hey, like, you're an adult now, you're a man, you need to either get a job, go to college, or get out. And I talked to some Navy recruiters talking about being on a boat for 6 months. I was like, that's not for me. And then the Army. Then I talked to my dad about basically the quality of life of the Air Force, about TDY and golf clubs and good chow halls and everything that comes with that branch. So yeah, at that point I was on the delayed enlistment program up until I graduated. Then July 17th, 18th of 2000, I flew to San Antonio for basic training.
And basic training in the Air Force, where you became a Special Operations Aviator.
Yeah, I was a U.S. Air Force Special Missions Aviator, and I was in the 16th Special Operations Squadron starting in 2010. on the AC-130 gunship, and I flew on the gunship as well as the Pave Hawk helicopter in the 41st Rescue Squadron. But yeah, it's basically, to sum up that job, it's like a Swiss Army knife in the sky, if you will. Basically, if you combine the aero gunner, a load master, and a flight engineer all together and put them in the air, that's what the Air Force gave you at that point.
This is the kind of job that there's got to be split second decisions, high risk missions that you're going on. Did you shift in personality? Were you somebody who could make a fast decision, or was the training there to help you get to that point?
Yeah, I would say that the training definitely helped. A lot of these decisions, I look at it, especially downrange, and it's not always a black and white answer. There is a gray area you sort of operate in, especially on the gunship. You're talking about, shooting basically a tank from a C-130 aircraft, the 105 millimeter, and there's decisions that have to get made, like how close is the friendlies to the target, and what we would call like a danger close shoot. And a lot of times, there's like 7 seconds between a conversation between the guys on the ground and us, and to get rounds out and potentially save those guys' lives. And it's a decision like, how much of a risk are they at? But if we don't get rounds, are they going to make it back? So that quick second decision training definitely helps you to be decisive, and plus just rely on the other crew members' perspective of the situation.
Community. There's got to be a lot of community in what you were doing out there.
Yeah, 100%. Community. Today's Veterans Day. And I was thinking about this earlier. My daughter asked not too long ago about friendships and, like, basically who to be close with, right? And who's to keep in our small circle. And I gave her the best analogy metaphor I could. I'd rather have 4 quarters over 100 pennies, each day. And then I went on to elaborate, like, if you go to the bank and you get change for $1, the teller gives you 100 pennies, right? Like, you could lose them halfway to your car. They could fall out of your pocket. They fall out in the bumpy ride of life, where 4 quarters are steady, hold you accountable, and you can account for each other, and you're always there, if that makes sense. So
That is an amazing analogy. Where did you hear that? Did you come up with that yourself?
yeah, that's sort of like spur of the moment. I came up with that one. I think I may have heard the 4 quarters part, but the analogy and elaborating on it, I definitely was driving by a bank with her when I said that, so it made sense.
I love that. Damn, I love that. It's also, it means also that those four people are pretty special,
Oh yeah, yeah,
as opposed to having 100, like, because we all have those people we say, oh, I'm friends with this person, I'm friends with that person, I'm friends with this person, and I have been that person. I've been like, are we friends though?
yeah.
Like, have we actually met? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, and I think that's part of being a good friend, is that they know what your likes and don't likes. They know, like, when something's off on you. They'll ask the hard question of, like, there's a difference with saying, "Hey, how's it going?" Or like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Really, right? Like, that level of, I guess, a care a friend would need. And there's one, I don't know who said this quote, but I love it, man. It's like, it's the ones that chose to stand in the rain with you when they could have remained dry. Remember that. And I've always stuck with that as far as friendships and who I let in this circle of life.
Did you ever get scared doing what you did?
Oh, 100%. I was, terrified. Especially when I was on the helicopter. We did a CASEVAC that was pretty, it was pretty sporty there in June of 2018. It was, in East Africa, we'll say that. But yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. But I think it's part of that world is learning to control that adrenaline. And there's a moment you realize in these moments where, like, I've been here 100 times in training, and then it kicks in, and you almost turn into a robot. And what's that saying? Reaction versus responding. That's a real thing in combat.
It's usually the after moments when that, cortisol and all that stuff that's still racing through you, or the adrenaline and all that. It's usually after the emergency situation that all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, because you get, like, time slows down, time goes back to normal, but you're still racing. And then it hits you.
Oh yeah.
It's the same way, like, we get in a car accident. You get in a car accident, thinking about the car accident over and over and over, questioning every angle of how you could have done it differently. How do you this, all those things.
Yeah, and even past all of that, like, a lot of what I struggled with was when I got out of when I saw the writing on the wall, it was over in the Air Force, right in the military. Like, I'm leaving this room where there's not even, out process in the military. There's not even a door hand on the other end of that door, and it's sort of symbolic. Like, man, I can leave, but I can never truly get back in. And when that dust settles, and you're basically, what I'm getting at is your loss of identity for many veterans. That's a real thing that a lot of people struggle with. And which is in turn a lot of the reason I wrote the book was to say, hey, it's okay not to be okay, and that we live very normal men and women doing very extraordinary, uncommon things, right? And to recognize that fact, and it's okay to get help.
What year was that?
So I got out of the Air Force December of 2021 is my last day of 1st of December.
So you did 21 years in the Air Force.
I did, yeah. It was 21 some change. I think it was like 21.4 years, give or take.
Amazing. And the book you're talking about is called Moonchild.
Yeah, it's called Moonchild: The Roots and Wings of U.S. Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator.
And why Moonchild?
Because the moon has played a very huge part in my even the day I was born. My dad told me later that I was born on the full moon, April 7th of '82. Show my age there a little bit, but it's always yeah. Flying, especially on the gunship, we mostly fly out at night. Mostly, and the moon was always a get well point to me, and a lighthouse. It was basically made almost effortless flying in the terrain and stuff like that. And another part of that symbology with it is like, in those darkest nights, those darkest moments, you don't get to fall, you get to rise. And that's when that moon burns the brightest for me is when I need it to the most. It's about really being your best on your worst day of your life.
Do you still feel that way when you go out and look at the moon?
Every time. It wasn't too long ago, there was a full moon, and I stopped I was with my wife and daughter, and I stopped the truck and I'm looking at it, and like, what is that? I'm like, oh, you don't see the moon, especially out here in New Mexico. It's on the high plains level. It's almost eye level. And it was just beautiful. Just lit up all the surroundings and everything. Lit my whole world up.
I love that you say you stopped the truck. I could tell by your voice and your accent that you own a truck. There's no question there.
Oh yeah, yeah. If we're growing up in Appalachia, sort of came with the territory, I guess. And
Let's talk about that. You grew up in a very in the woods,
yeah,
deep, deep in North Carolina. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, it was. If you ever been to Asheville, it's about an hour west of Asheville, a small town called Sylva, North Carolina.
Asheville's fancy.
It's a fun town.
And our heart goes out to them. I did an entire show about Asheville because they got pretty hit hard with the hurricane that came through. So what was that like to live so far out there?
It was an awesome experience, honestly. Like, there was a lot of outside. Like, we always played outside as kids, man. Like, if I wanted to go fishing, I literally walk down the street. And is so growing up in a small town. I'll say this: it's everybody knows everybody's business, which can be either really good or really bad. So there's that part of it. But at the end of the day, you'd do anything for your friends and your family, right? And it was some cool moments there. Like, literally, if you wanted moonshine back in the day, walk to your neighbor's house or whatever the case. Yeah, almost I always joke and say we might as well use it during communion. But yeah, yeah. But it was I was just a staple of that community, and just it shows sort of the grit, of the Scott Irish, the Tartan people, and then growing up 20 minutes away was the Eastern Band of Cherokee Nation, and it was just a theme of perseverance. Even growing up, those guys, always sort of taught me that you always have to, if you fall down 7, get up 8. That's what life's about.
And there's something about the land there, much like to where you are now. There's a connection that so many people have physically to the land.
Yeah, it's a very spiritual thing, and especially, like you said, both areas. Honestly, my wife's from the Navajo Nation up near Gallup, and I honestly noticed a lot of commonalities. Like, there's sayings that we had back home in Appalachian, the mountains, right? It's sort of spooky, and some people say it's haunted, the woods, and all that, and like, don't whistle at night. Like, I'd never heard that my whole career until I met my wife again, and she was like, "Yeah, we don't whistle at night either." Just a lot of common.
Wait, what happens if you whistle at night?
Basically, it's like saying you're inviting like ghosts or like
Oh,
you know,
spirits.
yeah, stuff, bad spirits and stuff like that. But yeah, there is some commonalities, which I found that interesting because we're on completely different sides of the U.S.
Now, we talked about this and you mentioned it a little bit here. There's a huge transition going into civilian life, coming out of the intensity of what you were part of and coming back and trying to literally find your ground after being not, physically being in the air, but also living in a completely different world.
I realized even at a young age, like, there's nothing you could take with you when you pass away, right? Like, the only thing you can leave behind is how you're remembered, and I realized that was my whole reason for being. Make sure these operators on the ground get home and stuff like that on the gunship, right? Like, that was over, and then in a way, I sort of had to get over myself, to be honest, and be like, okay, well, what's the legacy now? What matters now? And and it's finding those exciting moments in the calm, in the norm, with being the best husband I could be, the best father I could be, best friend I could be, and to me, that's what it's all about.
And in the book, you talk about that transition period. You talk about trauma, and you talk about addiction, but you also talk about finding purpose in that civilian life. So can we talk about all those things? Trauma, addiction, mental health and well-being, and just finding purpose.
Basically, like what I did, I'm gonna take it back to my last year in, and there was some other things happen. Like I'd lost a lung. It was some weird stuff going on, and um, the writing on the wall was over. Yeah, I knew that my career was over, and I was done flying. Right, and then I started, honestly, what was a weekend drinking habit turned into like a pint at least a night. And I was always a lightweight with alcohol anyway in the beginning, and but it just escalated, and basically to the point where my wife and daughter's like, hey, like, or my wife told me like it's either me and or your daughter or the bottle, right? And so I was okay, I'll get help. And I went to get see a psychiatrist with USOCOM, and I did prolonged exposure treatment because I didn't want medicine at first. And but what that is basically you're writing out your story, and you tell it over and over and over till you get to the point where basically like we're doing now, you can just have a conversation about it, and you can speak this stuff without going into that state, and basically comfortable being uncomfortable. And so some time goes by, and then the psychiatrist was like, you should tell your story, and I said no like 100 times, right? And when I got out, and then what would happen every time I wanted to pick up a bottle and get that strong urge to drink, which I definitely had, and anyone who ever struggled with addiction, can tell you it's a beast of a feeling. Um, but I picked up a pen instead of that bottle, and what would happen is I'd write all these, a lot of times, Charlotte's Web of emotional words, throw them on paper, then wake up in the morning and try to make sense of all this, and 2 decades of war and what all this was for, what it means. And yeah, so I replaced basically drinking with writing, if that makes sense. And it was very therapeutic in that process, and I highly recommend it.
How much of those words ended up in the book? Were you able to expose yourself?
Oh yeah, I was actually I had wrote, especially the cast of mission. There's a lot of dark moments in there, and I realized the way to heal was to get these on the paper, and and a lot of this I've learned is helping is healing. Like if you tell your story, it's almost contagious, like a domino type effect, where other veterans, first responders, or anybody for that matter, they see that, hey, it's okay to recognize and to put these words on paper, and get through that trauma together.
Can you recognize it like when you meet somebody in them? Can you see it?
Yeah, yeah, I would say you almost sense it in a way, just I'm not really talking about like 1,000 yard stare and all that stuff people talk about, but just a sadness with people that there's a certain sadness with people who's had trauma and they've never took the first step to heal. They're it basically, and that look itself is a cry for help, and you learn how to recognize that. And there's different signs they teach you about, like where, you know, for example, someone starts giving away all their belongings, or like they're really sad, 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 and one day they're really happy, right? Like there's these things you were sort of taught to look out for in the, in that world. But oftentimes it's the ones that you least expect it. That, I hate to say it this way, that go through with the act, right? And what I'm getting at is the unfortunately 22 veterans a day, we lose to suicide, and and I want to feel like that the first step to helping that person is to recognizing those symptoms, and that they're not themselves that you knew them as.
I write cozy mysteries, nothing like what you're talking about, but I think something we can probably agree on is when someone reads something we've written and says two things. One is, I could hear you in that, like you, right? I
Yeah,
can hear you, Anthony, in that when I read that. You know what I mean? And it's one of your four quarters, right? One of your four friends,
yeah,
your deep
yeah.
ones, right? And or I could see myself in it. And have you had those moments with people who have read the book?
Honestly, it's been overwhelming with like the text, and like even the Amazon review. What was cool, my first instructor, he said this would basically, the words he used was, this will definitely put you back in the plane for a bit, meaning like you're feeling like you're living that, like I'm telling the story, like they're there witnessing this, right? And that meant a lot to me. Like, man, like that, okay, he gets it, right? Like And I think a lot of writing is just honestly just like we're doing now, having a conversation and saying those hard things and facing those hard things together.
What do you want people to get from the book? Like, what do you hope that they get from it?
That you're always still in the fight. That's if you fall down 7, get up 8, and helping is healing. And everybody has a story, right? And especially every veteran has a story and first responder. And I would say bleed those words on the page. And for me, it was therapeutic. Hopefully it works for you the same way. Just it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not do anything about that.
We close these shows with 3 questions. Don't panic. You know the answers. Here's the easiest one. Where do people get the book?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere they sell books. If you search for it, it'll show up there.
The second to last question can go back to anything we've already talked about or anything you want to say. This is the question. Who inspires you?
I was always inspired by my grandfather. He worked till he was 82 years old, man. I'll never forget like this amount of just perseverance that man had. And, him and my dad sort of first helped me recognize that what Marcus Aurelius said is right. Like what we do in life echoes in eternity. So how do I want to be remembered?
And the final question is not a question. It is a statement to finish. You can say anything you want to say. It can be anything. And it goes like this. Finish the statement. Tell me something good.
If you're going through the shit and you're having a very, hard time, everything's against you, remember Henry Ford once said that an aircraft takes off against the wind, not with it.
Thank you, Anthony, for sharing your good self with us. For any veteran listening right now who is feeling the darkness, just know this, you are not alone. Help is a phone call away. In the United States, dial 988, then press 1, or text 838-255. If you're anywhere else in the world, do a quick Google search, Veteran Support Hotline, and you will find the same information for where you are. Just know this, don't forget, you are loved and you matter. Next time on World Gone Good.
My new career is a public relations person helping businesses and nonprofits who are trying to do good in the world and getting them into the news cycle, getting them the public awareness they deserve. So I'm using my gifts for good to try to get good news into the news cycle is my goal in life now.
Christine Whistler and I met through our show producer, Lisa, who said we got to have her on to share her good story. So I said yes. I prep all up, you know how I do, to record with Christine. Got everything ready to talk about her company, Southern Palm Communications, and the good things she's making happen through it. And we do. But then something really amazing happens where we turn an unexpected corner in the conversation and a whole other good journey, oh my goodness, is shared. Don't get me wrong, I love when this happens, and you will too. On our next all-new episode. Until then, be good.